live. Hey, we're all back. How are you? Well, I'll live long and prosperous.
Live long and prosper. How you all doing?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm not in the. It's not sermon from the German today. I'm not in the German. It's a bit hot outside, so I don't want to sit in the car and bake, But it hasn't helped because I'm in here and I've turned the lamps on, and I'm still baking now because I've turned the lamps on. So
they have a thing called in cars and in houses. It's called aircon. You can.
This is the UK. Aircon? What's that?
Okay, never mind. I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was. Yeah. You know what? You say that, but it's funny. I forget the hotel we were at, and they had the thing in the wall in London, and I went to turn it on, and my buddy's laughing. He goes, "There's not air conditioning, Steve. That's heat."
It's heat.
I'm like, what the? And it was like 25, 26 Celsius, and I'm like, they better get some friggin' air conditioning in here. Yeah. So I think the newer hotels.
I think we're now moving into that era where people are starting to think about aircon, and it would be a good thing to have. I mean, even as like cars. I mean, honestly, like now all modern cars obviously have aircon, even the ones that are available in Europe. But I remember in my lifetime, aircon was actually an optional extra.
I do too.
Yeah, we always had aircon in the car, always. Yeah. But Dad would always say, just wind down the window. Just wind down the window. Yes,
exactly. Natural air conditioning. Open the sunroof, wind down the window. That's what you said. And often, actually, do you remember? David? That it was either or. So you had the AC, or you could have the sunroof.
Yeah, but not both.
Yeah. Right.
Not both. Yeah, you wouldn't have both. You'd have either.
And of course, if you chose the sunroof on a car which was made in the UK, you guaranteed that it rained on you every time. Because it would leak, or it wouldn't open properly, or it wouldn't close properly,
But see, when I was a kid,
but I have to be honest, just to complete that thought. And sorry, Stephen, just to get in there, I have to say, because I've got a classic German car that does have a sunroof that does not leak. But the problem was that a lot of the cars that are, and still happens, a lot of the cars that are sold with sunroof, they're actually dealer fit sunroofs. And where there are dealer fit sunroofs is where you normally have the problems rather than the manufacturer fit sunroofs. Yeah.
When I was a kid,
sorry, I just had to get automotive journalist.
No, that's cool. My mom.
Remember they don't call you the brown car guy for nothing, do they?
For nothing. That's right. But remember the Gremlin?
Yeah.
The American. My mom bought a Gremlin.
Oh wow.
And I remember, like, she was looking at the Gremlin and the Hornet. And people that don't know this, you have to go Google what these cars are. And I remember the dealer.
Why would you call a car a Gremlin? I mean,
listen, it's American Motors Corporation. I can't help you. But anyway, and it had a little gremlin on the gas.
I've just bought a gremlin. Oh, really?
It was very cool. But it was funny because the guy said, "Do you want air conditioning or not?" And I'm a kid and I'm thinking, well, the house has air conditioning. And my mom, because we lived up north, was like, "No, we don't need air conditioning." And I remember that first summer, she was like, my dad had a Chevy Caprice. And it had air conditioning. So anytime we had to go somewhere, my mom would say to my dad, "I'm taking the Caprice." And he's like, "I have to go to work." She goes, "You can take the Gremlin." Yeah. So they got rid of the Gremlin and got another car with air conditioning. And I was like, but it was an option. I was like, I want to say like $250 or $300. It was a big, it was a big thing.
But I got to say, on the Chevy Caprice, that was a powerful air conditioning system on that one.
Yes.
They would love it because I grew up in Saudi around things like the Caprice Classic, and they loved them. And one of the reasons they loved them was because of really powerful ACs on them.
Yeah, no, that was an awesome
car. What I want to know is, does the guy still live who went into that very first marketing meeting and said, "We're going to call this car the Gremlin"? I mean,
AMC is no longer around.
Did he ever work after? Did he ever work after that? I mean, come on.
Let me tell you what AMC had. They had the Gremlin, the Hornet, and the Matador. Those were the three cars that they had.
A Hornet, I could just.
The Pacer. Oh, that's right. I forgot about the Pacer.
I mean, you can't forget.
Yeah, the back window leaked always on the Pacer, didn't they? They had quite a few things.
Just to tell everybody what Pacer is, you just have to say Wayne's World, the Wayne's World car.
Yes, that was the Pacer.
Everybody will immediately visualize the AMC Pacer.
Yeah.
But that was, I did have a friend who
that
had
was,
it. It was big fishbowl.
That was probably, what was that aimed at? People who had a pacemaker, I suppose.
No,
The Hornet was
pace,
supposed to be the female car. I mean, Gremlin. I mean, what sort of drugs were these people on? 1960s was this? All taking lots of drugs and naming cars.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, actually,
or were they all aliens?
Yeah, or aliens. Yeah.
There we go. We're going to start that topic now.
Segue.
Segue. There you go. Way to go, David.
Whoa.
I've been watching your shows.
There you go.
We have proof that there's alien existence.
I've been watching your shows for all the segues. That's what it is.
That was just a fly pass right there. So.
That was a fly pass. So we are going to talk about.
Would you like to
UFOs.
Explain to us what that large piece of plastic is, or are we supposed to guess?
Plastic?
Wow! Oh my God! This is going to be a whole nother show. That is a Star Trek Enterprise, my friend.
That is. Okay, so if you look, for those who are actually watching,
how does it manage to fly? It's got a huge standard on the bottom. I mean, you have to throw it. You have to throw it across the room or something. Or?
That's how it manages to stand. No, this is just a display model. Okay, but this is the Starship Enterprise E. So that was the last one that you saw in the movie series where the Next Generation crew were doing the movie. So this is the last one that you saw them in. And then the one that you see on, if the people who are watching this, you can see the shelf behind me. At the top of the shelf is actually the original. Oh, I'm pointing it incorrectly there. That's the original Enterprise. So that is NCC 1701.
That's the was that William Shatner one?
It. That's the Captain Kirk one. So yeah, that's the Captain Kirk one. That's the Captain Picard one.
The one that was on the wire, so they just sort of
They did. They used actual models as opposed to all digitally created models now. But back then they had to make the models. In fact, did you know? And again, this is really nerdy now. But the actual model that was used for filming was always filmed from one side, and that's because the lights only came on one side, and all the wiring was down the other side. So they couldn't show the other side.
Very cool. I never knew that.
That's not. Do you know why you didn't know that, Stephen? Because that was very nerdy.
Yes.
Okay. But here's the truth. Wait. I'll tell you what's even I'll tell you what's even nerdier. I got an offer, and I sent it to our friend here, an offer to bid on a whole bunch of Star Trek, Star Wars, and a whole bunch of memorabilia, and they had like one of the original, I guess whatever the original Star Trek from whatever show. So I sent it to him. I go, listen, I think you're going to want this. And he was like, are you kidding? Look how much they want. It was just funny because I was like, this is your stuff. It was all Star Trek and Star Wars. It was a big, I think it goes on this week in Beverly Hills.
I can't remember how much these are, but that might be like $100 or something like that. Right. But you were talking like $1,000 and stuff. I was like, dude,
wait, that was the opening bid because that model was used on whatever television show or movie.
No, that's crazy.
Yeah, that was like. But if you're
any Trek merchandisers out there, if they are listening, I am looking for a really good jacket. So
don't you? You have one though.
That's a regular jacket with a series of badges because I've got all the badges, So I just got out the badges,
Well, nerd alert.
But if anybody out there does do this, there's a new series, Strange New Worlds. And in season 1, they wore these dark jackets with the United Federation of Planets logo on the shoulder. If anybody does really good versions of those, get in touch because I'm interested.
Okay. If you can't get a hold of Brown Car Guy, get in touch with us. We'll put you in touch with him, and you guys can. And actually, you know what we'll do is we'll have him open it on the show.
Oh yeah!
You can open it on the next show, and then he'll also open it on the Brown Car Guy channel.
Exactly.
So your product will be global overnight.
Unboxing across the Atlantic.
That's right.
Awesome?
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. You'll have an unboxing of that.
I just put up a picture meme thing on the Brown Car Guy Facebook page. Go look it up. And it was basically the bridge of the original Enterprise. And I think it's Spock going to Kirk or Uhura saying, Captain, we have an incoming transmission. And Kirk says, put it on the view screen. And on the view screen, you see a car's gearbox, an incoming car.
Oh, that's funny. I like that. That's cute. Very cute. Look at you, creative.
There's me mixing my two passions, automotive and science fiction. There you go.
There you go. Well, this is really going to mix your passion because today we're going to talk about UFOs and UAPs. and the U.S. government admitting that we have alien spacecraft. And last week, well, this will be 2 weeks when this airs, but when the Las Vegas UFO that landed and this person saw an 8 to 10 foot alien, or two of them, in front of their spaceship. So now the big question is, do we believe, and are we alone?
Well, can I just say before we go any further that this only seems to happen in the US. So we'll leave that as a caveat.
Country. No, you guys have it too. You had the Ramsden Air Base incident where the whole air base was on high alert.
Rendlesham. It's very near to where I was. Very near to where I was born. But,
I think there's two things here. I think that obviously there's been this huge pop culture thing in America, because science fiction has obviously always been a thing there, going way back to the 50s, you know. Right. So there's always, that's always, you know, it's fed the imagination, and it's fed people's ideas of what they're going to talk about and stuff. So it could be said that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, you create this thing, people get into their head, and then they think they saw something that might relate to what they saw on television. So that's one part of it. Having said that, like you say, there have been sightings actually around the world. There have been incidences around the world, Middle East, Far East, Asia, and definitely here in the UK, but they haven't been as widely reported. And then you always get these blurry images and this and that. And in the past, you could kind of understand and say, okay, the camera quality was never that good. People didn't have cameras in their phones, etc. So you'd have to get the camcorder out, and that wasn't great, or whatever, you know. So you could understand that. The trouble is nowadays it's a little bit more difficult, because nowadays, you know, every one of these devices has got a really high quality camera on it now. Right. So if you can't get a picture of what you say you've seen, if you can't instantly get a picture, then why not? And if you do get a picture and it's blurry, then why is it blurry? Because surely these should be able to get a good picture. So there is that argument as to why haven't we seen genuine evidence of these things, you know, going viral on social media? Because surely the first thing, if you saw an alien, the first thing you do these days is get a selfie, right?
Right. Well, you hope, if they're friendly. Well, the one in Vegas is interesting.
That's right before he vaporizes you with the ray gun.
Right. I was just going to say, like the movie Attack of the Martians with Alec Baldwin and all those guys. But here's the interesting thing, or Pierce Brosnan, I'm sorry. But what was interesting with the Vegas one is that the police's body cam actually caught it coming down. Oh, okay. And they've been showing it. And then there's a guy on the telephone calling 911 going, there's a craft in my yard. Right. And there's these 2 8 or 10 foot people near the craft, and he's describing them, and it made the news all over. But my thing also is I've been fascinated since I'm a kid, but what I think is fascinating, if you go back and look in history, there's reports of UFOs. So like they didn't have this technology back in like the 13th century, you know, or 10 or 200 BCE. So when you see that, or the Vatican painting from the 15th century where there's literally a spaceship in the background, or in Germany in the 1800s where a newspaper talked about an aerial battle over their city, and then, and I'm going to pronounce it wrong for all the Indians listening, I apologize, the Rashi talked about their flying carpet machines and showed you pictures of these things. So I think there's something there. Whether they're multi-dimensional. There's wall
carvings as well, aren't there? There's wall
carvings. Everything.
Where people have been shown in helmets, and you go, well, what, they wouldn't have had any concept of these kind of space helmets and stuff, you know.
Correct.
Yeah.
But is that because we want? Is that because we fundamentally want to have something? Want to have an alien?
I think you're right. I think absolutely.
Force around us, you know, because it contradicts all our earthly faiths. For one thing.
No, I don't think it does, though.
No.
I don't think it does.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's elaborate on that then, because I can't agree with you on that. Yeah, because the Vatican's not going to own up to it, are they? They're not going to say, by the way.
Look, all I've got to go on, with all respect to all the other faiths, is the one that I know, right? And I know there's a verse that says it's something along, I'm paraphrasing, but something along so I know any Muslims watching are like, oh well, this guy, he's going to get a fatwa now, he didn't pronounce this properly, but anyway, it's just paraphrasing, so it's not an actual quote, but it's something along the lines of Allah, who is the creator of all the worlds, and the worlds is plural, right? So to me it's like, okay, we know that there are planets, we know there are other things, but of course, you know, at the time we didn't have that much knowledge, but when it says creator of all the worlds, then to me that leads to an assumption that if you're saying creator of the world, you wouldn't just say planets because they're just dormant or inactive or static planets, but you'd say worlds as in worlds that are populated, where something is happening, you know. So to me, I actually don't that it contradicts
Does
religion.
that take
at
you
all.
down the road, then the very controversial road, then that the prophet was not of this earth? Because I mean that's a big can of worms to open.
What was not of the earth?
The prophet.
That the prophet was not of the earth.
Well, I mean, in our teachings, all the prophets are human beings, so they are of the earth.
Yeah.
You know? So there isn't that dilemma as far as I'm concerned. But basically my take on it is I don't think that it's contradictory to religion to say that there are beings on other planets. You know, and the other thing that's in our teachings as well is that every nation and every tribe. This is why this is why in the Quran and I believe in the Bible and Torah as well, is all the other prophets and messengers are also recognized. And the reason they're recognized is because I think there is, again, I'm paraphrasing, but there's a quote that we sent messengers to all the peoples, right? So to my mind, I would interpret that to say is that all the peoples here, yes, on Earth, but I'm assuming that actually in other places as well, in other planets as well. So again, I don't see it as a contradiction. I see it as like, okay, the creator of all the worlds could have created any worlds, could have created other prophets and other messengers, you know, to go to other worlds. So I don't see that as an issue at all, you know. So I know that there's a big battle often between religion and science, and of course we're talking science fiction. But as you guys know, I'm quite spiritual, but I'm also a massive science fiction fan, you know. So and I have no issue at all reconciling those two at all. I think they sit very well together. I don't think there's a problem.
But is it science fiction though, or is it a reality? I think that's the question.
You know, this fascination has been fueled by Hollywood. You know, and is that not just the next stage up from cowboys and Indians?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite possible. I mean, it's quite funny that you should say that. So in answer to your point there, again, this is quite geeky, but when Gene Roddenberry, the founder of Star Trek, went to sell it to the channel, he knew he couldn't sell them a sci-fi show because there were no such things at the time. So he told them that it was a cowboys and Indians in space. That's what it was. He said it's a Western in space, you know. And these guys on the Enterprise, they're basically, you know, on a wagon trail, and that's what's happening, you know. That's what's going on. So that's how he pitched the whole thing. That's how he got it through. But I mean, you know, there is a. You could say that yes, Hollywood has created this. Like I said, we've had sci-fi from the 50s. And those thought processes have gotten into our psyche, have gotten into our imagination, and we've created these worlds or these ideas or these concepts through those. But as you said, Stephen, if you go way, way back in history, you still see these little glimpses of possibilities that they were seen before. And this way predates, you know, fiction even. So, you know, even if you go back, when was Jules Verne? Even before that, it would predate that, right? So I think that there's always been something there. And to answer your question, or I can't remember who raised the point, is it about do we want to believe these things? And I guess that's also true because it's a fundamental human trait, isn't it, that we don't want to be alone. And I think that, you know, especially when we started to discover the vastness of the universe and how minute we actually are as a planet in that context, then when you start to look at it in that frame of mind, then you do still start to feel as that we can't be alone in this, you know. And then that comes to the logic side of it. So the logic side of it, from my point of view, is that when you do look at the science and you look at the fact that there are X millions numbers of stars and then X billion numbers of planets for each of those star systems, and then we are one of those, then logic absolutely dictates that, well, you know, this can't be the only place where there's life. You know, if life can exist here, if everything can come together for life to happen, even if we take out the whole spiritual aspect of it and we discount that God created us and we just say that science made this happen or evolution made this happen, and you go, okay, fair dues, evolution made it happen, but if it made it happen here, it could make it happen anywhere else. And of course, there is the argument that actually organic matter came to Earth from an asteroid, which means that it then came from somewhere else, which means that life must exist somewhere else. So I think that it's fairly logical to assume, both spiritually and scientifically, that there is life elsewhere.
But although the numbers are stacked against us, they or stacked in our favor, when you think, yeah, well, we're one of billions, etc. You know, people like, you know, eminent scientists like Brian Cox, for instance, he says the chances of finding a Goldilocks planet, which is what they consider the Earth to be, are even smaller.
Yeah.
So
well, I don't know. They used to find them on every episode of Star Trek because every time they
so it's not that hard.
Every time a shuttle is in trouble, they go, well, let's find the nearest M-class planet to land on, and lo and behold, it's an Earth-like planet. So I mean, okay, scientifically, the thing is, we don't know, do we? I mean, we're all speculating.
No, we don't.
We're all looking through little telescopes and going, oh, that must be an Earth-like planet, and that's probably not. But we don't know until we get out there, until we have warp drive. We don't know that we.
Right, but I think we're missing a bigger point here. Is that there's a couple things. One, we only know this dimension. There's other dimensions, right? And there's other things, right? So the spacecraft could be coming from somewhere else. That's I think UFOs, UAPs, whatever. I think they could come from somewhere else. The other thing is the guy in the 40s, the pilot who saw the 9 discs. I read an interview with his daughter. And she said, my dad, when they asked him what he saw, he just said discs. He said, but they weren't. He said they were very translucent, like almost like they were alive. And I thought that was very interesting. And the other thing I think that people forget is that in the latest article about the UFOs, and Bob Lazar said this years ago, like 40 years ago now, that the UFO can change time and space when it moves. That's how it can do these movements. And the other thing that they said was interesting is that it looks really small on the outside, but when you go in, it's huge. So it can distort things. So we're only knowing as our form as a human, what we know. But if you start looking at like the Doctor Who telephone booth and all this other stuff, all these reports that come out from the government, the TARDIS, right? All these reports now.
Time and relative space and interdimensional, something like that. Dimensional interspace or something like that, isn't it? TARDIS,
But that's what all this seems to be.
What you're getting to, and this relates obviously to a story that came out a few days ago about them actually supposedly having intact or semi-intact vehicles. So I mean, there's 2 questions here. I think one question is very easy to answer. Does alien life exist? Is there life on other planets? And I think that you can answer absolutely yes.
Right.
Yes, it's inevitable. Just the maths alone says it's inevitable that it will be there. What stage it's at, where it's at, I don't know, but it's inevitable that there will be. So that's one question answered. And the second question is like, well, have they visited us? That's a whole different ballgame. That's a whole different can of worms, because there again, the science comes into it. And the contention being is that the distances involved are so vast, and it's so like beyond comprehension that it would be impossible for us to ever meet these other beings.
But for us, it's not comprehensive, right? But if you have a wormhole and you have all the other stuff,
I was going to say, however, then leading to your point about the ability, because I mean, if you look at these things, I mean, again, the weird thing is that Star Trek got so much stuff right. And the whole idea between these starships was that they ran on warp drive. Okay, so what is warp drive? So warp drive isn't just something that pushes this faster than the speed of light, which is technically impossible, right? It's not just something that makes it go faster. Warp drive, actually, what the idea was that it would create a bubble of space. So it would distort space around the ship. So basically, it would distort space, which would then propel it. So basically, you would twist space to get this thing beyond where it is. So it's not like it's traveling through space. You're actually twisting space around it. That's what a warp drive is. That's why it's called warp. And that's what a warp bubble is, which is what carries it along. So again, the thought was always there, was the conventional concept.
Yeah, but is that science fact or science fiction then?
Well, it's a combination, really, because a lot of
Einstein.
A lot of the stuff that came into Star Trek was a lot of it was because Gene Roddenberry was an engineer himself, ex-pilot, ex-engineer. He was a radio engineer, a bit like Isaac Asimov, also was a radio engineer, I believe. And so they based a lot of their concepts on these ideas. And they understood that, okay, well, faster than light travel is not possible. So how would you do it? So you have the wormhole idea, you have the conduit idea, you have the interdimensional idea, and then you have the idea of bending space around you. And bending space, of course, the other thing with that is that that kind of tries to compensate. Again, if you actually travel those distances in space, then people would age relatively at different speeds. Right. So you'd go off on your 5-year mission, you'd come back and everybody is dead because it's been 50 years. I mean, that's what, So how do they get past that, for stories to work, right? So then you just bend space. So actually time hasn't flowed, but you've bent space to get to somewhere quicker. So, you come up with all these ideas. And, since these ideas, the weird thing about science fiction is that fact often follows fiction, because a lot of the stuff that was, if you look at the communicators in Star Trek, this is what we've got now. If you look at 3D printers today, it's what Star Trek replicators were, So,
Right.
and if you look at the idea of warp drive, it is something that is being looked at. I mean, I think NASA is looking at the idea of warp drive.
But my argument would be this, Shazad.
I was just going to complete that with the idea of dilithium crystals, which again seems a completely absurd idea, but
Right.
actually there is such a thing as the concept of radioactive diamond batteries, everlasting. And that's a proven concept. So again, in that's what I'm talking about. Like fact often follows fiction.
Yeah, but my argument would be that we have 3D printers because somebody would have seen that as science fiction.
Yeah.
I thought, let's build the replicator. That's basically what it is. It's not like it's always been there. We're kind of always as if we're technologically
it's not
following a story.
It's not a case of science fiction writers being able to predict the future. It's a combination of science fiction writers using their imagination, but then scientists, and this is true for a lot of science, for Star Wars and Star Trek, a lot of the scientists that you see working in NASA and stuff like that are inspired by those things when they were children. And then they were like, okay, I want to go and see if that's actually possible, or I want to go into that field, or I want to go into that academia, even medicine, I mean, again, I know I have no great memory for these things, but I always paraphrase these things. But I think it was an interview with Dr. McCoy, and he said the most touching thing, or the guy that played Dr. McCoy, obviously, what was his name? It'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, so he said that one time he got a letter from a fan who'd become a doctor because they had seen him, and he said that was the most inspiring thing that he ever got out of it, So it's those kind of things that happen. And when they met, NASA scientists that had grown up watching Star Trek, when they named one of the space shuttles, they named them Enterprise in tribute to Star Trek, and all the Star Trek's crew went down there to see the launch of this thing, So it does inspire reality. But it could also be argued that science, by its nature, would have got there anyway. Maybe it would have got there a bit slower, but science fiction drives these things. But again, I want to go back to the idea of, okay, yes, we've established, or we have, if we like, we can go, yes, there is life in other worlds or whatever, but how can it get here? And I think this is the thing. And if there is really evidence here of intact or semi-intact vehicles, as they were described, it's like, where are they from and how did they get here? That's what I want.
All right, so here you go. Bob Lazar. If you don't know who Bob Lazar is, if you're listening, you're going to have to Google him. But Bob Lazar blew the lid off of Area 51 back in the 80s. Bob Lazar in the 80s talked about the different UFOs that he saw. He also said there was an element called Element 115, which at the time no one ever heard of, never existed. And sometime, I think 2010, 2015, two Russian scientists said they discovered Element 115. So Element 115 is what this, if you will, almost the matter that you're talking about. He says this is what propels the UAPs or the UFOs and helps them distort time and helps them distort space, is this Element 115. And so see, I listen to what everybody says, and I'm pretty open-minded, but I like to read everything, right? So I listen to what people say, and I read all these books, and I'm like, but when people 50 years before, like somebody discovers something saying, look, or when you go back into antiquity and it's just like, look at this and look at that, or they're just discovering now superhighways in Central and South America that are like 5,000 and 10,000 years old. They're coming under the shrub, right? So we only know this much of our history, right? And let's just say it goes back to like Babylonian. So we're going to go maybe 1 million years back. That's as far as we go. Yeah. We don't know what happened 50, 100, 200, 500 million years ago here, or even 1 billion years ago. Yeah. So we have no idea. For all we know, we're some kid's science experiment. Yeah. You know what I mean? So he could be like, when you die, and he's like, get away from me. So, and that's the whole thing. So, Skinwalker Ranch, there's a book about Skinwalker Ranch, and it talks about this guy was using night vision. He's watching these things crawl through a Cloud. There's things that go on there that you can't explain. Like the U.S. government has a thing there. base there, and they're trying to figure it out. So it's very interesting. So I think what science does and the government does, well, the government especially, right? Because if they find this stuff, they don't want to tell people. But I think what people do, if they can't explain it, it doesn't exist. So science fiction is a kind of a cool kid way to go, oh, look, right? But I'm more, I want to know. I don't think there was a report that came out in the 60s by the Brookings Institute to the CIA and that had it done that said that if people found out that we weren't alone in the world or in the universe, they would freak out. Maybe in the 60s that was true because of World War II.
Yeah.
Now, in the year 2023, I think if a spaceship, for lack of a better term, landed in Central Park, no one would give a shit. They'd be like, that's nice, whatever, I got things to do. You know what I mean? It's like, it's to a point now where nobody cares.
It goes back to, oh, quick, grab a selfie and then move on with your life sort of thing. That's
right.
You know, it would be like
and that's the society we're in.
I want to ask you a question.
Gentlemen,
sure.
Yeah. Okay. Go on, David.
I was just going to say, guys, you know, like, okay, so it lands. So are you two at the front of the queue? Or at the back of the queue?
Oh, yeah, in a minute. In a minute.
Definitely.
Oh,
definitely.
Yeah, first one.
If you had you know, what was it? The War of the Worlds happened in London, right? Or the original radio show happened in London, right? If I'd heard that on the radio, I'd be down there. I'd be like, all right, get the next tube down. I want to go see this thing, you know. But I wanted to ask you this question, Stephen, because you were talking about the development since the time as well. Now, we know, for example, that technological developments in humanity's history often happen through conflict. So we know that we had a huge technological advancements during the Second World War, for example. But then since the Second World War, we haven't had a major global conflict. But since the 60s, we have seen technology just go crazy, right? With you know, with devices like this and stuff like that. Was that just a latent after effect of the technology that had come before, or could it be, as some people argue, that they did find these crashed spacecraft, or there was some kind of alien interaction, or maybe even deal making, if you really want to take this to its extreme, that allowed us to accelerate our technological achievements, especially in computerization and miniaturization, compared to where we were. You know, I remember. You think, I mean, you're both old enough as I am to remember when radios had valves in the back of them. Radios used to be this big, you know?
To answer your question, yes. And
they went to the moon, didn't they? They went to the moon on what's in the calculator.
Supposedly. But anyway, yes, I think they did. So here's the answer to your question.
You don't believe they went to the moon, Steve?
I know, I do. I believe they do.
I got sacked in Dubai in my kid's school. He was a science teacher in my kid's school. And my kid come home and said, oh, yeah, our teacher told us the moon landings didn't happen. I'm like, what? I was down there next day to the headmaster. And I was like, your science teacher is telling people this, you know. And
that's not good. But to answer your question about technology, if you look at the Nazis, right, they actually made a disc-shaped aircraft and it flew. There's actual footage of it. And you can watch it. They had the Nazi Bell, which got destroyed when they told the Bell did these strange property things. After the Roswell incident, I read a book by Corso, and he said he literally wrote about the incident, what technology they got, and he talked about how they divvied the technology to like Bell Labs, AT&T. So that's how you got fiber optics and got this and got that. So I think part of it, we'll just say for the sake of this dialogue, UFOs are real, aliens, for lack of a better term, whatever. I'm sure they don't call themselves aliens, whatever they are, lizard people, you know, my people, all real. But I'm assuming, yes, we would have gotten there, but would we have gotten there as quickly, or would we still be like, you know, on the Model T car right now? And with all this technology, did we go further? I think what's happening also is you have astronauts like Lovett, who said, let me finish. Lovett wrote a book. And he went to the moon, and he has like 19 PhDs. And he said, there is alien life. I've seen it. And he's giving all this proof in this book that's yay thick, which I've read. And other astronauts on their deathbed or military people are saying, they tell you.
But what does he say specifically in the book that would have convinced you?
No, he said when he was circling the moon.
Stephen,
okay.
Yeah. Before we pick up on that point, just to summarize that, are you suggesting that this alien technology is being dripped out by governments, and predominantly by the US government, to big tech companies? So every year we get something new.
Back in the day, yes. Now, no. I think back in the 50s, the 50s, 60s, and maybe up until mid 70s, it was very patriotic, right? You were doing things for the U.S. government or whatever your government was. I think in the 80s that shifted, and definitely by the 90s, no, I think they don't drip it out anymore. I mean, Skunk Works, which I think is Grumman or Northrop's secret program, they probably get it. But back in the day, AT&T, Bell Lab, they were all in bed with the government. So I think, yes, they dripped it out. I think now, and pick whatever company, I think if the spaceship crashed in their backyard, they'd never call the government. I think they'd strip it, reverse engineer it, and go, hey, we've got a flying car, or we've got this, or we've got that. So I think it's a different mentality in 2023 than it was in 1940, 1950, 1960. But to answer your question about Levitt, he literally discussed when he was circling in his capsule, while everyone was on the moon, he said, I would see vehicles. He said, we would talk on a secure channel and the guys would say, they're here, they're watching us. He said, that's why there's the secure channel and an unsecure channel. And he would describe these conversations of like what they would see, cities, vehicles. And I was like, well, this is interesting. And this guy's got, like I said, like 50 PhDs. He's not making it up. He didn't get rich on it. He just said, they're here. And he said, the government's biggest fear. Then? And on the moon, there's supposedly cities and stacks and whatever. So NASA gets a picture from the moon. Or first of all, just so you know, Mars isn't red. Okay, I watched this whole special. What happens is NASA, and NASA, those guys, they color scheme it for you. Like everything goes through a scanner. So when they get a picture of a moon, they clean it up. So when we see what the picture is, they take out whatever they don't want you to see. They do Mars, they make it red. Mars looks like the Arizona desert. I watched the whole thing on a couple months ago, and the guy was saying, if you saw this picture, you wouldn't know if you're on Mars or in Arizona, right? So they make it a tint of red and go, look, you're in the Martian world. So what NASA feeds us, pardon my friend, is bull, right? So I think they're so scared. And a friend of mine who works for an agency that doesn't exist told me this on a flight in the late 80s. He said, the reason governments will never tell you, and maybe it's changed, about UFOs or aliens, and now I think it's a little hard because of like the cell phones. I don't think they knew about that technology back then. He says, because once you know you're not alone. He asked me, he says, so if I tell you I know there's life on X planet and they're multidimensional and they're this and that, he goes, what are you? He says, are you a United States citizen? Or do you become an earthling, or do you become a citizen of the universe? And I said, you become a citizen, you're an earthling, a citizen of the universe. He goes, and once religion and governments can't control you because of that, he said, that's what they fear. And they said, interesting. So that's the thinking. But now I think everybody knows they're here.
The irony is, the sad part of all of that is that a lot of people have said, and a lot of fiction has predicted, if you remember, there's a very famous graphic novel called Watchmen, which I think was also converted into a movie as well. And the whole premise of that is that because humanity is on the brink of war throughout that story, and the whole premise of it is they create an alien being. If the alien being is so vast, so scary, that it basically creates unity amongst humans, because suddenly we all come together if we know that there's a common enemy. And wasn't there a quote from Ronald Reagan who said the same thing, didn't he, in one of his speeches?
In a UN. He said if there was a threat out there, how we would all come together. So some people say he was foretelling and warning us of what's going on.
Some
it's
people
very interesting.
Knew something.
Right? And here's what's even more interesting.
Didn't he also say to Steven Spielberg when they were watching E.T. together?
Yeah.
I might be paraphrasing, but didn't he also say that, if only people knew how true this was? I mean,
Yep. And the other thing, which is also interesting, Bill Clinton and Obama and Carter said in interviews, when they would speak to agencies that don't exist about this, they would literally say, this is above your pay grade.
Yeah.
And there's a book called Out There that I read probably in the 80s. It's fascinating. And the beginning of the book talks about a reporter calling the general to ask him about something about UFOs. Yeah. And the general speaks to him. He got all the information, whatever. And he said he had a follow-up question. He called back 3 days later, and he called the number and he asked for the general, and they said that person doesn't exist.
Right.
So there is, not that they killed him. I think they just say no. I think the government.
Well, maybe he got abducted by aliens.
Yeah, abducted. But I think the governments are still working under this Cold War premise, and I don't think they realize the Cold War is over.
Let me ask you this: how is it possible in today's day and age with these and social media and all the rest of it to continue to keep the lid on these things? Or are they just creating false narratives now? Have we got to a point where, like in the old days, if somebody came out and had a picture of a genuine alien and put it in the newspaper, in old terminology, in the newspaper, the whole world would be like, oh, we have proof. But now that we've got AI, artificially generated images, you've got CGI,
fake news.
You can't believe anything you see anymore.
Fake news. When Steve started talking about this incident in Vegas, the first thing I said to him, very tongue-in-cheek, I said, "Oh, it's fake news, Steve."
Yeah,
but it's apparently it's not. But here's the thing:
now that even if an alien stood in front of us, we're like, "Oh, you're just CGI, aren't you? You're just."
But the TikTok. But here's what's the funny that little Tic Tac thing that the U.S. Navy filmed, and it did all this maneuver, and the guy said it went from like 80,000 feet to like sea level in a second, which is unheard of, right? So that would be, you can bend time and space, and that means it doesn't compress your body or whatever. So the interesting part about all of this is that I think it's there. And to answer your question, I think there are people that are putting these, like there's 50,000 YouTube channels about UFOs, and they have some compelling video. There's TikTokers that have it. So I think we're catching the video. I think what's going to end up, like the guy with the 8 or 10 foot alien, he said the eye, he described it. It was okay. I think what's happening is, I think as our phones are getting more advanced and people and even scientists now have more open minds about it, I think that is very interesting. Like the big almost log thing that came through a couple of years ago from another solar system in the universe. They were saying that could be a spaceship. That one Harvard professor's like, that's probably a spaceship just passing through. And people are like, oh, you're crazy. But he said, and he's an astrophysicist, and he said, let me tell you. He says, an asteroid, if you will, or a meteor does this. It goes on a straight course. He says, this does this, moves here, moves there, moves here. It's moving like it's under control. He said, so it probably is. So the problem with the globe, or a percentage of it, is unless it's black and white, they don't want to think differently. So I think when we finally find out that other life forms are real, whether they're our dimension, other dimensions, whether they can bend space and time, I think there's all these other people are going to be like, we told you, and the rest of the planet's going to be shocked, but for like a day, and then they'll go on.
And just
but it's also when you read these military reports about UFOs over nuclear bases, shutting them down, turning them on, showing that their power. It's very interesting. There's a whole book about that, and it's just there's so much evidence out there. And
you know
I think
what people would be worried about if that happened, Steve? Whether or not they could get a burger from the McDrive. That would be the thing that would that would
No, people wouldn't be worried about it. It's McDonald's and Burger King be like, oh, how do we set up our franchise?
How do we can we put a franchise on your planet? Yeah,
exactly. That's how we do that. So they'd be like, business opportunities. That's what they'd be thinking, I don't know. I'm just wondering if we have become so numb now that that we can't even see the truth when it's in our faces. And if it even is there, we're like, we really don't care anymore. And I wonder if
well, maybe that's the whole premise of it. That maybe that's what. That's how it's served up to us in such a way that it's so unbelievable that we can't believe it.
No.
And so, and to comment upon it, people just go, "Yeah, really? Come on,
No,
I had this conversation with a lot of people.
If anybody gets this far and watching this or listeling to this, then they're probably going to be saying the same, right? They're like, "Well, we're three bunch of idiots. How can they be talking about this?" I mean,
exactly.
They're talking there in cloud cuckoo land. That's because we've just basically between the three of us now basically answered both questions. We've just said yes, there is alien life form, and yes, they have visited us and they have interacted with us. We've just said that now.
There you go. And you know what? Since it's on the internet, it's true. It has to be true. Well, it's on the internet, so there you go.
It's now part of the digital concrete, which we all.
No, but the thing is, like, if you say that people like Lovett and other astronauts have actually come out and said these things, I mean, surely you can't get a more credible source than an actual astronaut telling you these things. So why are we not going, oh yeah, damn, there must be aliens out there, because these guys have been up there and they've told us this.
Because remember, the governments will be, and I think the governments globally are falling apart, and you can't keep everybody like your thumb on them forever now, especially with different technologies and whatever. And I think that was there, like I said, back in the Cold War, we don't want people to whatever. In 1952 or 54, there were 7 or 8 discs that flew around the White House, and they scrambled jets to go get them, and they outflew the jets of the day. Okay, they would just disappear. in 1976, there was a 747 or 767 flying from Alaska to Japan, and the radar guy from the FAA kept the tape, and it shows the plane and it shows this object the size of like the Empire State Building doing maneuvers that were unheard of. So once again, there's so much evidence out there that people just scoff at it, push it aside because it's the fear of the unknown.
The narrative has already been sold, hasn't it? The narrative, because it's like, oh, we didn't go to the moon. And so therefore,
we went to the moon. Stop.
No,
I was there last
a lot
week.
of people who don't believe that. And
no,
so we didn't go
I got a science teacher sacked because that's what he told me.
Yeah. So we never went to the moon, and so therefore, the only people that have been up there looking down on us are the astronauts who have their story, their credible story, is not credible because they were all part of the conspiracy in the first place. So the two things sort of link in. Eh?
Yeah, but now we're entering an age where any millionaire with $500,000 can go to space. So it's not even restricted to governments and astronauts anymore. It could be anybody. Tom Cruise is filming in space, isn't he? For the next
he wants to film in space. Yeah, he wants to go to the space station and film.
Right? So what if whilst he's up there with all these cameras in space, and then suddenly they go, "Oh, what's that going past?" You know what I mean? Are they going
It's too late. The Russians have already been up there and filmed, so they've already done their movie. So
but the other thing is I think what's going to end up, well, it's just I think the space shuttle catches stuff all the time, and they always dismiss it. But then when you see these other things where since they have these live feeds and people just record the live feeds and the live things and they catch everything before NASA can give you the clean version, I think we're in a time and age now where people are like, there's something there.
So let me ask you this. You're talking about the narrative that was created in the 50s and 60s because of the way that they wanted to drip feed technology and to control the narrative, basically. But what's to stop them right now going, you know what, let's open the lid on this thing. Let's just tell people what's going on.
I think they're dripping it out. That's why the Pentagon made an announcement in 2019 that they have alien technology. That's why they did it again now, because the first time they did it, nobody cared.
Oh, do you think
now they're doing it again?
You think they're conditioning us to a grand reveal or something?
Yeah, I think that they're getting to a point where they're going to be like, and now we pull down the curtain, and they're not going to tell you they've known about it for a billion years, right? They're going to go, we've just known about the last few years, and we wanted to make sure it was safe. I think that's where we're headed. Or unfortunately, whatever little craft is going to crash into like a real city, and people are going to be like 8 foot or 10 foot tall, like the Vegas thing, and people are going to be like, well, they're real. Yeah. And so I think it's going to be an A or a B. I think governments of the world are under a time constraint to reveal, because whatever's coming seems to be coming now in force and be popping everywhere.
It's coming now in force.
And you know what's coming in force, gentlemen?
What?
You know what's coming in force? The time restraint.
The end of the show.
Sorry, guys.
We'll have to do a part 2.
You could talk about this for hours. I'll tell you that much.
We'll come back.
Well, then I think the next show we should do a part 2. What do you think?
I think that we should. I think that this.
Go ahead. You can talk through this.
What was I was going to say? I think we can segue this into AI. Because AI is
next show is AI.
Yeah.
I like it. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and don't forget to go to the Brown Car Guys channel on YouTube, which will have the link below for you guys. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful day. Yes, we love Star Trek.